My name is Ethan Cole, and tonight I want to tell you a Christmas story, the way it was once told to me, out loud, late at night, when the fire was low and no one was laughing anymore. So lean in a little closer. This happened in northern Michigan, where winter doesn't arrive gently. It comes in hard, off Lake Superior, with wind sharp enough to cut through wool and snow that buries fences overnight. The town was called Marrow Creek, though most people just called it the Creek. And if you blinked while driving through, you missed it. One gas station, one diner, a post office that closed before dark, and at the very edge of town, a road that no one used after December. I was 27 that winter, working odd construction jobs and trying not to think too hard about where my life was going. My Uncle Ray owned a cabin about 3 miles outside Marrow Creek. No running water, spotty electricity, and a wood stove that popped like gunfire when the logs shifted. He'd asked me to stay there over Christmas to keep an eye on the place while he visited family downstate. "You'll have it all to yourself," he said. "Quiet." That should have been my first warning. The cabin sat near a frozen inlet, surrounded by black spruce and birch trees that rattled constantly in the wind. When I arrived on December 22nd, the snow was already knee-deep, the sky low and gray like it might collapse at any moment. There was no cell service, no internet, just the radio, the stove, and whatever thoughts I brought with me. The first night passed quietly enough. I cooked canned chili, listened to the radio, and watched darkness press against the windows until it felt like the cabin was floating in it. Around 10, the radio crackled, then settled on an old AM station playing Christmas music. Scratchy, distant, but comforting in a lonely sort of way. I fell asleep in the armchair. I woke up to knocking. Not loud, not urgent, just 3 soft knocks, evenly spaced. I checked my watch. M. The knocking came again, this time closer. Not at the door, at the window. My first thought was an animal, maybe a branch in the wind. But when I stood and pulled back the curtain, I saw a woman standing in the snow. She wore a long, dark coat and no hat. Snow clung to her shoulders and hair, but she didn't seem to notice the cold. She stood perfectly still, looking past the glass and into the cabin, her face pale in the porch light. I didn't open the door. I don't know why. I just didn't. Instead, I raised my hand in an awkward wave like that would explain something. She didn't wave back. She lifted one hand and pointed past me, deeper into the cabin. Then the porch light went out. When it flicked back on a second later, she was gone. I didn't sleep after that. The next morning, I drove into town as soon as the plow cleared the road. At the diner, I mentioned the woman to the waitress, a tired-looking woman named Linda who poured coffee like she'd done it for 40 years straight. She didn't ask me what the woman looked like. Linda asked. Linda nodded once. I waited for her to say more, but she just refilled my mug and walked away. An older man at the counter leaned toward me. His name was George, and he smelled faintly of pine sap and diesel fuel. "She always points," he said quietly. I asked. George stared into his coffee. He told me the story whether I asked for it or not. Back in 1961, a school bus skidded on black ice on that same road by the inlet. Christmas break had just started. The bus went through the guardrail and into the freezing water below. Most of the kids got out. One didn't. A little girl named Martha Bell riding the bus home for Christmas. Her mother waited at that cabin, my uncle's cabin, for hours, convinced her daughter had gotten off at the wrong stop. When the truth finally came, something in the woman broke. They said she walked into the snow that night, calling her daughter's name, and never came back. They found her coat in the trees come spring. I drove back to the cabin with that story sitting heavy in my chest. The rest of the day passed quietly, but as night fell, the cabin felt attentive, like it was listening. The radio turned itself on. A choir sang, "O come, all ye faithful," their voices warbling through static. The knocking came again. 3 soft taps, this time on the cabin wall behind me. I didn't look. I don't know how long I sat there staring into the fire, pretending nothing was happening. Eventually, the music stopped. The knocking faded. Christmas Eve arrived under a blanket of snow, so thick it muffled every sound. I decorated the cabin with what little my uncle had left behind, a strand of lights, a chipped ceramic Santa, a paper star taped to the window. That night, just before midnight, the power went out. The cabin plunged into darkness, except for the fire. And then I smelled it. Cold air, and lake water, and something old. Footsteps moved slowly around the cabin. Careful, bare. I stood, my heart hammering. A woman's voice called softly, just outside the door. The handle turned. I don't remember deciding to open the door. I just remember doing it. She stood there exactly as before, snow clinging to her coat, eyes hollow with hope that had lasted too long. "She's cold," the woman said. I followed her without thinking. She led me toward the inlet, the ice groaning beneath our feet. Halfway there, she stopped and pointed. Not at the water, but at a small snowdrift near the trees. I knelt and brushed the snow away. There was a child's mitten there, pink, frozen stiff. When I looked up, the woman was gone. The next morning, rescue crews came. They found Martha Bell's remains where the ice had shifted over the decades and pushed her close to shore again. They buried mother and daughter together before New Year's. I stayed one more night in the cabin. It was quiet, warm. The radio didn't turn on. I left before dawn. To this day, when Christmas music plays too softly, or when snow falls without a sound, I think of that woman pointing into the dark, not to frighten, but to remind. Some people don't want to haunt the living. They just don't want to be forgotten. And that's the story I wanted to tell you tonight. Story number 2. People in my hometown of Harlan Ridge, Pennsylvania, like to say Christmas comes early there. Snow usually shows up by late November, the kind that sticks to rooftops and telephone lines and never quite melts until spring. Main Street puts up its lights the day after Thanksgiving, and they leave them on all night. Red and green bulbs buzzing softly in the cold, reflected in dark shop windows. It's the sort of place where nothing big ever happens, and that's exactly why no one ever expects anything strange. But strange things do happen in places like that. They just learn to hide better. The year this happened to me, I was 32 years old and freshly divorced. Back in Harlan Ridge, for the first time in almost a decade. My mother had passed away in October, And the house I grew up in, an old 2-story farmhouse at the edge of town, was suddenly mine. I told myself I came back to sort through her things, to decide what to sell and what to keep. The truth was simpler and harder. I didn't want to be alone in my apartment in Cleveland for Christmas. The house sat at the end of a gravel road, surrounded by bare trees that creaked when the wind moved through them. At night, the place felt older than it had any right to be, like it remembered winters long before mine. My mom used to joke that it settled louder in December, as if the cold woke it up. The first night I stayed there, snow started falling just after dark. I remember standing at the front window, watching flakes drift down through the yellow glow of the porch light, thinking how peaceful it looked, how quiet. That was when I heard footsteps upstairs. I froze, one hand still on the curtain. The house shouldn't have made that sound. It wasn't the usual groan of wood or the tick of cooling pipes. This was slow, deliberate, heel to toe, moving across the old floorboards above me. I told myself it was my imagination. Grief does things like that, especially in familiar places. I grabbed my coat and went outside to smoke, letting the cold clear my head. When I came back in, the house was silent again. It didn't stay that way. Over the next few days, little things started happening. I'd set my keys on the kitchen counter and find them hanging on the hook by the back door. I'd turn off lights and come back into a room to find them glowing softly again. Once, I woke up before dawn to the smell of pine, sharp and clean, like a fresh Christmas tree. Except I hadn't put one up yet. The radio was the worst. It was an old tabletop radio my mom kept on the counter, the kind with a real tuning dial. I hadn't touched it since I arrived. But every night, sometime after midnight, it would turn itself on. Always to the same station. Soft, warbling Christmas music. Songs that sounded decades old, sung by voices with that distant, echoing quality you only hear on recordings made before everything went digital. The volume was always low, like someone was listening from another room. The first time it happened, I stood in the kitchen in my socks, staring at the radio like it might bite me. I turned it off, my hand shaking just enough to notice. The next night, it happened again, and the next. By December 20th, I was sleeping with the lights on. I finally mentioned it to someone else when I ran into Earl Watkins at the hardware store. Earl had lived in Harlan Ridge his whole life and knew everyone's business, whether they wanted him to or not. He asked, ringing up a box of nails. "Yeah," I said. Earl hesitated, his hand still on the register. "That house always liked Christmas," he said carefully. I laughed, a little too loud. He shrugged. The name stirred something unpleasant in my stomach. "Just that they lived there before us," I said. Earl nodded. "Longer than most folks remember. They were there in the 30s, had a boy." I waited, but Earl didn't continue. I prompted. "On Christmas Eve, 1938, the house burned," Earl said. "Neighbors said it went up fast. Too fast." Earl met my eyes. The parents made it out. The bell over the door jingled as someone else came in, and Earl cleared his throat, suddenly busy with my change. "Probably just stories," he added. But he wouldn't look at me when he said it. That night, the radio came on earlier than usual. I was sitting in the living room, half asleep on the couch, when the music started. Not softly this time. Loud enough to fill the house. I stood up, heart pounding, and listened. Someone was humming along. It wasn't coming from the radio. It was coming from the hallway. The sound was thin, reedy, the voice of a child who didn't quite know the words. I took a step toward the hall, then another, every instinct screaming at me to stop. The hallway light flickered on by itself. At the far end, near the stairs, a small figure stood with its back to me. A boy, maybe 8 or 9 years old, wearing an old-fashioned coat that looked too thin for winter. His hair was neatly parted, his shoes polished to a dull shine. I whispered, not knowing why I said it. The boy turned. His face was pale and solemn, his eyes too dark, like windows into an unlit room. He smiled, slow and careful. "Mama's late," he said. The radio cut off mid-song. I don't remember running upstairs or grabbing my keys. I just remember sitting in my car at the end of the driveway, breath fogging the windshield, staring at the house as snow fell thicker and thicker around it. For a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw someone standing in the upstairs window, watching me leave. I spent the night at a motel on Route 9 and didn't sleep at all. The next morning, Christmas Eve, guilt settled over me heavier than fear. That house wasn't just mine. It was his. Whatever Thomas was, whatever he wanted, I knew it had something to do with that night in 1938. I went to the town library and dug through old newspapers on microfilm. It didn't take long to find it. "Local boy lost in Christmas fire," the headline read. The article said the Harrow's son had gone back inside the burning house to retrieve a gift he'd hidden for his mother, a carved wooden angel he'd made in school. By the time anyone realized he was missing, the stairs had already collapsed. They never found the angel. I drove back to the house as dusk fell, the sky turning the same deep blue I remembered from childhood. The fear was still there, but it had changed. It felt heavier, sadder. I put up the old Christmas decorations my mom kept in the attic, hung the lights, set up the tree. When the radio came on, I didn't turn it off. At midnight, the smell of pine filled the house again, stronger than ever. The hallway light flickered. Thomas stood at the foot of the stairs. "I found it," I said, holding out the wooden angel I'd discovered tucked inside a wall cavity behind the fireplace. He looked at the angel, then at me. His smile this time was bright and real. "Merry Christmas," he said. The lights went out. When they came back on, the house was empty, quiet, warm. I stayed the night. Nothing strange happened after that. The radio never turned itself on again. The footsteps stopped. The house felt like a house, not a memory clinging to itself. I sold it in the spring. Sometimes on Christmas Eve, I still smell pine where there shouldn't be any. And sometimes, just before midnight, I hear a boy humming an old song about coming home. Story number 3. My name is Caleb Morgan, and this is a Christmas story I was told when I was young, one I didn't understand until I was old enough to wish it wasn't true. It takes place in Appalachian, Ohio, in a town so small it didn't have a welcome sign, just a hand-painted board nailed to a tree that said, "Drive slow." Most people pass through without noticing it, except in December when the hills filled with fog and the church bells carried farther than they should. I was 19 the winter I heard this story for the first time, home from college and helping my grandfather tend his property outside town. He was a quiet man, the kind who didn't waste words unless they mattered. Every Christmas Eve, without fail, he'd pour 2 fingers of bourbon, sit by the wood stove, and stare at the dark window like he was waiting for someone. That year, snow fell early and heavy. Roads closed. Power lines sagged. By sundown on Christmas Eve, the world outside his cabin had vanished into white and shadow. That's when he finally spoke. "You hear about the hollow carolers?" he asked. I shook my head. "They only sing once a year," he said, "and only if someone's listening." He told me the story like it had been handed down, polished smooth by repetition. Back in the 1940s, before electricity reached the hills, families used to gather on Christmas Eve and walk the hollows singing hymns. Whole groups, parents, kids, neighbors, moving from house to house with lanterns and voices raised against the cold. One year, a group never made it home. A sudden snowstorm rolled in, worse than anything forecast. The singers took a shortcut through Miller's Hollow, a deep ravine that funneled wind like a blade. By morning, their lanterns were found smashed at the bottom of the slope. No bodies, just scarves frozen into trees and hymn books soaked through with ice. The town searched for weeks. Nothing. After that, people said the hollow sang back. I laughed, nervous but unconvinced. Grandpa didn't. At exactly 11:30, the wind died. The silence pressed against the cabin so hard my ears rang. Then, faintly, so faint I thought it was the stove settling, I heard it. Singing. Not loud, not clear, just enough to recognize the shape of a hymn. Voices layered wrong, some too slow, others rushing ahead like they couldn't agree on the living pace of time. Grandpa stood and pulled on his coat. "Don't," I said. "Please." "They don't like being ignored," he replied. Against every instinct I had, I followed him outside. The snow had stopped falling. The moon lit the hills silver, and down in the ravine, a line of dim lights bobbed through the fog. Lanterns. As they drew closer, the singing grew clearer and colder. Faces appeared in the glow, pale and indistinct, mouths opening and closing slightly, out of sync with the sound. They weren't walking on the ground. They drifted just above it. One of them turned its head toward us, then another, then all of them. The song faltered. A woman at the front raised her lantern and spoke, her voice echoing like it had to travel too far to reach us. "Is it Christmas?" she asked. Grandpa nodded. "It is." Relief washed across their faces, fragile and desperate. They sang again, stronger this time. And as they did, the fog thinned, the lights dimmed, and one by one they faded into the hollow, voices trailing off like breath in winter air. When it was over, Grandpa crossed himself. "They just want to finish the song," he said, "same as always." We went back inside. Neither of us slept. The next morning, Christmas Day, the storm broke. Sunlight filled the hills. Everything looked normal. Too normal. Grandpa passed away the following spring. Now, every Christmas Eve, I pour 2 fingers of bourbon and sit by the window. And when the wind goes still and the night holds its breath, I listen. Sometimes, just sometimes, I hear singing, and I listen all the way through, because unfinished songs don't rest easily.